On the last episode of Enter the Survival Horror, I mentioned that after the release and massive success of Resident Evil 2, Capcom began working on multiple Resident Evil games. These projects were planned to release on a variety of different consoles. At this time, Capcom had around 5 different Resident Evil projects in development. These would include what we know as the Raccoon City side game, Resident Evil 1.9, the light gun spin-off, RE Gun Survivor, the Nintendo 64 exclusive RE0, Hideki Kamiya's RE3 boat project, and finally, a port of RE2 for the Sega Saturn. With all of these projects happening at the same time, it proved to be a massive strain on the teams developing these games, obviously leading to big development struggles for most of these titles. As we know now, RE0's development would be put on hold and later resumed on the Nintendo GameCube years later. Kamiya's RE3 transitioned into a plethora of game ideas until finally becoming Devil May Cry, RE 1.9 ended up becoming RE3 Nemesis, and surprisingly, Gun Survivor released on time without any problems. That leaves us with the Sega Saturn port of RE2. This port was overseen by series director and producer Shinji Mikami. While in development, Mikami and his team realized that the Saturn's power wouldn't be enough to properly port RE2 without making some pretty drastic changes that would have affected the game's overall quality in a negative way. RE2 Saturn would end up being cancelled, leaving a lot of Sega fans who enjoyed the Saturn version of RE1 in the dust. Shortly after this game's cancellation, Mikami was approached by a Sega employee who suggested making a Resident Evil game for Sega in the future. Mikami and his team quickly came up with some new ideas and thought to apply them to the upcoming Sega Dreamcast console. With this new goal in mind, the idea of Code Veronica was born, a Resident Evil side game directed by RE1 designer Hiroki Kato. CV and RE3 would be developed at the same time and released only 1 year apart. This has often led many people to speculate and theorize that CV was actually supposed to be the original RE3. This is a common misconception. Even though the story of Code Veronica would be continuing Claire Redfield's story from RE2, this game from day one was always intended to be a side game released exclusively for the Dreamcast. At this time, the PS2's release date would be pushed back along with RE3's development. Capcom didn't want PlayStation players to feel like they had to wait or buy a new console just to get them next mainline entry to the series. Since Kamiya's RE3 idea wasn't working out on PS1, the Raccoon City spin-off game RE 1.9 was then promoted to mainline status and lives on as RE3 Nemesis. I thought I should make this point clear because I see a lot of people online bringing up CV being the true or original RE3. It was always meant to be a Dreamcast game alongside RE3's PS1 release. With that being said, the story of CV is a continuation of Claire Redfield's story from Resident Evil 2, and when RE2 released on Dreamcast in Japan, the game included a playable demo of Code Veronica to get Dreamcast owners caught up on Claire's story. 1 year after CV's release, an updated version of the game would come out on PS2. Resident Evil Code Veronica X. Capcom's reasoning for bringing CV to the PS2 is because they felt that the game would have a much bigger reception on PS2 because the Dreamcast's player base was much smaller in comparison to Sony's new console. A very understandable change from a business perspective. The X version of Code Veronica includes additional story events and extended cutscenes. I'll be talking about this version in today's video because I played this one first and I no longer own a Dreamcast, so I couldn't play the original CV for this video anyway. I have a pretty deep history with Code Veronica, so I'm excited to talk about it. It's a very strange and interesting Resident Evil game. So without further ado, let's go on the wild ride that is Resident Evil Code Veronica.